So once upon a time, there was this young buck by the name of Fergus. And when I say young buck, I mean quite literally a young male deer who had just recently started to sprout antlers. And compared to a lot of the other young male deer in his area, he actually had the nicest antlers. You know, most of them when they're young bucks, they only have like one little spiky point on each side. But this guy, Fergus, he actually had two little spiky points. And so his antlers were the envy of all the other young deer in his area. And in fact, all the does were actually starting to take notice of him even because he had such nice antlers.
Nice rack on that little one though.
Well, anyway, on one cold but clear day, about 5 days before the darkest day of the year, young Fergus was wandering through the forest and he came across a stream, and he decided to jump across the stream in order to cross it. And so using his powerful, springy legs, Fergus took a leap and he crossed over the stream without even much effort. But when he landed on the bank on the other side of the stream, suddenly one of his antlers, his right antler, actually wiggled and fell right off. Fergus was stunned. He never knew that his antlers could fall out like that. And he quickly turned his head backward to look to see where it fell. And he saw the antler tumble into the running stream and go into the water. And with a loud kerplunk, it went into the water and it drifted downstream out of sight from Fergus. And his antler was totally gone. For just a moment, Fergus sat there stunned because he wasn't even quite sure what to do about all of this. First off, he didn't even know that this could happen. And second, he was now a lopsided stag with one antler on his left side and nothing on his right side. And he was terrified about what all the other deer were going to say about him. Because, I mean, after all, Fergus had always been known for having really nice antlers. And now that he only had one antler, that wasn't really nice. In fact, it was going to look really weird and it might even make people mistake him for a doe. And he was a young buck and he couldn't have something like that happen to him. And so alone in the forest, wondering what he should do, suddenly Fergus had an idea. He saw a tree branch on the ground that was roughly the same size and shape as his antler. And so he decided to pick it up and he tried to attach it to his head. Unfortunately, a deer's hooves are terrible tools for trying to attach sticks to your head, and so he was kind of at a loss for how to get it attached. But he saw a little vole wandering across the ground, and he asked the vole for some help. The vole, seeing Fergus in his plight, offered to take a little bit of pine sap that was dripping out of a nearby pine tree, and the little vole took the pine sap, applied it to the end of the stick, and then stuck the stick to Fergus's head. And even though it was a little bit wiggly and a little bit wonky, it seemed to attach itself okay enough. And so Fergus thanked the vole for his help and went about his way. Now later that day there was going to be a meetup of all the local white-tailed deer, and Fergus felt like with his newly attached stick in place, he would be ready to meet back up with everybody, and he hoped that nobody would notice the fact that he lost his real antler and he was now walking around there with a stick. But as soon as Fergus got to the rendezvous point to meet up with all the other deer, any thoughts that he had that his stick antler wouldn't be noticed went right out the window. Because in particular, this one deer, Tony, who he really disliked, saw him and immediately noticed the stick.
Hey Fergus, why does your one antler look so weird?
And Fergus tried to play it off like it wasn't weird at all, there was nothing wrong, and he was like, I don't know what you're talking about, man, I'm just here with my antlers. Why are you looking at my antlers so much and making fun of my antlers? And as soon as Fergus made that statement, he immediately regretted it, because Tony took his antler and smacked it up against Fergus's stick antler, and it cracked almost immediately. And all of the other white-tailed deer saw this, and they just started laughing hysterically. Like they thought it was the funniest thing in the world, and they were all making fun of Fergus because he lost his antler. And now I know you guys might be thinking about like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and the reindeer games and how like structured their social hierarchy was and just how critical they could be of a weird reindeer like Rudolph. Well, believe you me, as bad as reindeer can be, they are nothing when you compare them to white-tailed deer. They can be just absolutely brutal and vicious towards one another. And so poor Fergus, because he only had the one antler, was mocked and laughed at and ostracized by all the other young deer in the herd. And so feeling like crud and an exile, Fergus left the meetup and went to wander the forest alone. And he wandered the forest alone for several days. And over those couple of days while Fergus was alone, he just grew sadder and sadder and more depressed. Like, was he gonna really have to live his entire life as a deer with only one antler? Was this gonna be what his fate was, just doomed to wander the forest by himself, just without any friends and without any company, and just to be laughed at by all the other deer around in the woods? And basically that's just what Fergus did. But then one day, it was actually on the darkest day of the year, Fergus was wandering through the forest and he heard something crying. And when he looked around to see where the sounds were coming from, he actually saw a mother rabbit, and she was digging at the frozen ice and snow on the ground, weeping and sobbing, and she was beside herself. And Fergus saw this and he felt bad for her, and he asked her what was wrong. And the mother rabbit explained to Fergus that her kits were trapped inside this burrow and they were too weak to get out, and she was trying to dig them out, but the ground was too frozen and she wasn't able to get them out. And she was terrified that her kits were gonna die, and she didn't know what to do about it. And Fergus saw this, and he took pity on her. He wondered if he could maybe dig his way out. And so using his hoofs, he actually tried to dig and help out the mother rabbit. But unfortunately for Fergus, it didn't seem like the ice was yielding to his hoof. But the mother rabbit asked, well, what if you use your antler and you try to use your antler to dig them out? Would that work? And now over the last couple of days, one of the things that Fergus had noticed while he was all by himself was that his second antler, the one on the left-hand side, was actually starting to get loose and wiggly, kind of like a loose tooth. And he was worried that if he tried to use that antler to dig it out, it might just snap off, and then he'd be doomed to have no antlers whatsoever, and he would be an antlerless buck, and that would be a terrible way to live the rest of his life. But he looked at that mother rabbit who was there weeping and desperately trying to dig her children out, and he took pity on her. And so he bowed his head and he started to dig into the snow and into the ice. And lo and behold, the antler was the absolute perfect digging utensil to try to free the kits. And so Fergus dug and he dug and he dug. And with one final mighty thrust, he thrust his antler into the icy snow and pulled it up, and the ice and snow went flying out of the way, and the little rabbit kits came running out of the hole and went to the warmth of their mother, and Fergus's lone left antler fell off to the ground, and now Fergus was an antlerless buck. Well, now the mother rabbit, she was so grateful to Fergus. You know, the fact that he went out of his way to try to rescue her children, and he was able to rescue her children, and she was so apologetic about the fact that he lost his second antler. And she thanked him profusely, and the little kits who were so adorable, they were just these tiny little rabbit kits, they too thanked Fergus profusely. And while the kind words were nice, it wasn't gonna make Fergus feel any less of an outcast. And so he said farewell to the rabbit family and he went back to wandering the forest. And well, the very next day, Fergus realized that he couldn't hide from his herd forever. And so he met back up with them in the forest. And when he first came across all the other bucks and does of his herd, what he soon found out is, shortly after he had helped the mother rabbit had come across the other deer. And she had told them of Fergus's bravery and his willingness to help, and the fact that he sacrificed his only antler to save her young children. And so when all the other deer saw Fergus, they didn't look at him like an outcast. They looked at him like a hero. And they praised him for his good deeds and the fact that he was a friend of the forest. And they celebrated him and they welcomed him back to the herd with open arms. And they didn't care about the fact that he didn't have his antlers. And in fact, most of the other bucks in the herd had actually all lost their antlers too. Because apparently every single year, white-tailed deer lose their antlers. And so it's just a normal part of the process. And so what happened to Fergus happens to all deer. But unlike the other deer, Fergus was able to help some other creatures by sacrificing his antler. And so that is how Fergus the deer became a hero amongst his other deer. And wouldn't you know it, shortly after he lost his antlers, new antlers started to grow in their place for Fergus. And by the summertime, his new antlers were even more glorious than his previous antlers. And so yes, that is the story of Fergus, the antlerless deer. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope you have a very, very wonderful day. You can check out some other videos, and I'll be back with another one real soon. Thanks for watching.